The Secret Science Behind Miracles by Max Freedom Long. The significance of seeing into the future in the psychometric phenomena and in dreams. To be able to see a future event before it occurs is even more amazing than firewalking. One can, by stretching a point, imagine that there are physical explanations for fire immunity, but by no stretch of the imagination can a physical explanation be given for seeing into the future. It is all as clear as day. A future event has not yet transpired, therefore it's utterly impossible to see it or know in exact detail what that event will be. But the impossible and incredible happens. We actually see events before they occur, in dreams or visions. We sense future occurrences and call this sensing premonition. There is a third impossibility which stands beside fire immunity and prevision as proof that there are higher and little known powers at work in this world of ours. This third thing is instant healing, a matter which will be considered at much length later because of its great importance. As a secondary but most desirable and practical part of the Huna lore of seeing future events, there is to be considered the magical practice of changing the future in order to better events which are seen and found to be undesirable. This magical art was a large part of the work of the kahunas, for they healed both body and purse, social and economic tangles. While it is of the utmost importance that we recover Huna and so add to our priceless store of human knowledge, it is even more important that we learn the ancient methods of calling down instant healing and of gaining the help of the high selves in changing and reconstructing the accidental future so that it becomes ordered, planned, and fortunate. As a matter of fact, it may be said that instant healing, or even the slower psychological healing practiced by the kahunas, is directly related to changing the future. If a patient is very ill and is suddenly healed, that change in itself marks a change in the ordinary course of the future in which the illness might have resulted in eventual death. Aside from the usual explanation that God knows and shows the future in dreams, prevision, premonition, or clairvoyance, call it what we will, we moderns have nothing faintly resembling an explanation to offer. However, we have accumulated considerable information as to the occurrence of these glimpses of the future, and this information can be used to check against the theories of Huna, which are the only detailed and logical explanation mankind has ever evolved. There are several items of popular belief or disbelief that need to be discussed briefly before going on. The first of these is part and parcel of most religions, and raises a question which only the kahunas can answer in a conclusive manner. The problem of free will and premonition. In religions, war has long raged between those who taught that man had free will to do as he pleased, and those who taught that because God must, if rightly understood and evaluated as a creator, know everything that each one of us will do in future, we have no free will, our every act being decided upon in advance by a supreme being, and therefore predestined, unchangeable, and inevitable. Science, in grappling with the problem, has taught that everything happens in a purely accidental manner, and that free will is the answer, overlooking the fact which bothers the religionist, that the future can be, and often is, seen. The bare and uncompromising records of the psychical research societies tell of many instances in which events have been foreseen and have been avoided by what cannot be described as anything but the exercise of free will on the part of those who were warned. In my own experience, I had such a case. One evening, at a spiritualistic seance, I was told by an entranced medium that I was slated to have a bad auto accident in the near future. I considered by asking whether my friend Bob, sitting at my right, was also to have an accident. After a pause, the answer came as no. I asked my friend to accompany me and help me watch for an accident-potent situation for the next few days. 3 days later, we were driving through Honolulu when, at a busy intersection, a drunken truck driver drove his truck at high speed from behind a streetcar and came directly at me. I happened at that instant to be watching a car crossing ahead of me on the opposite side. Bob, however, caught sight of the truck rushing toward us, seized the wheel and twisted it around, and at the same time shouted a warning. The result was that this partial turn made by my car allowed the truck driver to squeeze in ahead of me, crumpling a front fender instead of striking a disastrous blow full on the side of the car where I sat. This incident is typical of the evidence which shows that the future which would normally occur can be foreseen, and that it is not unavoidable, providing one is able to take the proper steps to circumvent the unforeseen incident. The question of the value of seeing future events is settled by the mass of proofs, my own experience being only one of thousands, showing that once forewarned, we can take steps to change or evade future events. A moment's thought will show how valuable to humanity an extension of the faculty of premonition would be. General or world conditions can be seen ahead, and the individual can profit by such foresight. I have a friend who saw in a dream the financial crash of 1929, and who sold out all his stocks and invested in government bonds. He warned several acquaintances, but his warnings were not heeded. The warnings were 3 months ahead of the crash, and all looked rosy, and some of the acquaintances were ruined. The Kahuna explanation of the problem of free will versus predestination is that the Aumakua, or superconscious parental pair of each of us, has a form of mentation or mental power unlike our own. It is higher than power of remembering, which characterizes the low self, or the power of inductive reason, which characterizes the middle self. It is such that, among other things, it enables the high self to see those parts of the future which have been crystallized or set. Much of the future is in a fluid or uncrystallized and unset state and cannot be seen. Great world events seem crystallized farthest in advance. In a like way, the long-term events in the lives of individuals are set and may be seen, such events as marriage, accident, and death. There is a very distinct philosophy in the Kahuna beliefs concerning the element of free will enjoyed by the low and middle selves which live together in the human body to make the man. The high self, which is connected to the body by a thread of the aka, kinomea, or invisible shadowy body stuff, and through this connection maintains contact, is under some compulsion to let the lower selves exercise free will and learn by experience, unless they desire and request guidance and help from the higher self, in which case the Aumakua takes a hand in the affairs of the man. Only in planning the long-term events in the life of the man is free will seemingly denied. But even then, if proper steps are taken to change those events, it is possible to circumvent them to a degree. There seems to be two kinds of free will. One for the low self in its less highly evolved state as an animal, and therefore under the rule of some high self which presides over physical growth and operations connected with the body itself. Because of this direct supervision, the body conforms to definite and set patterns, while the conscious mind or middle self, having more complete free will, has the privilege of dictating the external activities of the body, although not its internal vital functions. It might be said that man has two high selves, one for the low self and its guidance, and one for the middle self. The group soul idea of theosophy closely checks with the high self guiding the animal man, and with the idea that the lesser animals and creatures are also guided and informed through instincts by high selves watching over them in groups. As we cannot penetrate the plane of consciousness just above ours, that of the high selves, we cannot know to a certainty what the real state is in this relation. However, we can observe the many acts and conditions of living things on our levels and draw our conclusions. This also holds for our observations when we see some mysterious consciousness using some mysterious force through some mysterious form of invisible matter to produce fire immunity, instant healing, prevision, the material phenomena of spiritualism, and so on and so forth. The kahunas also believe that all premonition comes from the high self by way of the low self or subconscious. This agrees with the known fact that we cannot, by any effort of the will, force ourselves to see into the future or dream of it. In hypnotized subjects, the order to look into the future is seldom obeyed, thus causing us to conclude that the subconscious, which alone is suggestible, does not have the ability to look into the future. If neither the low or the middle self can see ahead at will, and as a result of its own natural ability, we must look for another source of prevision. Look to the superconscious or similar higher beings. A proof that the kahunas were right in saying that all premonition must come through the low self lies in the fact that we get visions, dreams, or other forms of knowledge concerning future events through the subconscious when it is relaxed, when it is let alone by the middle self. The most relaxed state for the low self, and the time when it is most completely free from the domination of the middle self, is during sleep. For this reason, it is natural that premonitory dreams are the most common sources of knowledge of future events. In crystal gazing, there's a similar relaxation, but of a lesser degree. The middle self stands by in a waking state to observe what is sensed by the low self through the images centering around the crystal. In telepathy, the low self is also the agent performing all the work, and it has to be allowed to slip the ordinary control of the middle self and relax in order to project its finger of invisible, shadowy substance, and so contact the person from whom a telepathic or mind-reading impression is to be gained. The verification of the kahuna belief that the low self is the one which performs all psychic acts always comes back to the indisputable fact that our best known self, the middle self or conscious self, cannot, under any circumstance, use its will to force us to produce psychic action. We can only give the order to the low self and then let go of it so that, in a relaxed condition, it can set to work, exercise its psychic abilities, and present to us through our mutual center of consciousness the information obtained. In getting information concerning the present, the low self can reach out and read minds or gather telepathic impressions directed to it by another, and otherwise act on its own initiative. But when it comes to the future, it must contact, as in telepathy, the high self, and ask that it be given glimpses of the part of the future which has crystallized and which would therefore be visible. The making of future, according to the kahunas, depends upon the plans and desires of the lesser selves. These plans and desires, and unfortunately our fears, are made into thought forms, composed also of shadowy body stuff, and are used by the high self in some seemingly automatic process of constructing the future for the individual. Just how this mechanism works is uncertain, as it belongs to the next higher level of consciousness. But the kahuna spoke of the thought forms as seeds, which were taken by the Aumakua and made to grow into future events or conditions. The kahunas considered it of great importance for the individual to take time out at frequent intervals to think about his life and decide in exact terms what he wished to do or wished to have happen. The average person is too much inclined to let the low self take the helm, which is dangerous because it lives under the domination of the animal world where things happen illogically and is apt by accident. It is the business and duty of the middle self, as guide for the low self, to use its power of inductive reason and its will to control the low self in making plans for the task of living and seeing that proper efforts are made to work according to those plans. The average person, especially if emotional, an indication that the low self is too much in charge, changes plans too often, also changes desires. The result is the making of a mixture of contradictory thought forms of plans, wishes, and fears, from which the high self, perforce, makes a mixture of future events fully as unsatisfactory and inconclusive. A large part of the kahuna's magical practice in days gone was aimed at seeing what crystallized future lay ahead for the client, then procuring changes in that future to make it more desirable. Later on, we will take up exhaustively the methods used by the kahunas and the nature of the difficulties to be overcome. Dreams are the open door to premonition. Research has disclosed the fact that in our dreams we are given to see the future almost nightly, but that we do not remember the dreams, and so remain unaware what is to come except by vague uneasiness stemming from the depths of the low self. Little is known of dreams, although there has been much conjecture and much muddled thinking about dream conditions. One thing, however, stands out clearly, and that is the fact that the low self has a peculiar knack of confusing things sensed in dreams with things familiar to it, frequently joining one idea to another through a process of association to make a symbol. The practice of psychoanalysis is largely based on a study of these symbols as they appear in remembered dreams, or in thoughts which come into the mind of the patient when he is in a state of relaxation brought about, in some cases, by suggestion or mild drugs. Dr. Nander Fodder, one of the leaders in this field and now practicing in New York, writes in his many articles on the subject of a curious thing observed in psychoanalysis. It is that certain symbols mean the same thing even when found in the dreams of many different people, none of whom are acquainted with the others. This seems to be more than a coincidence and points in the direction of the group soul, as do similar instincts with similar reactions in creatures lower than man. It is to be concluded that a direct seeing of a future event may be passed on to us by the low self, or it may pause to mix what it sees or senses with things already known to it, thus producing a symbol which the middle self will have to try to understand. In her valuable book, Telepathy, Aileen J. Garrett tells of the frequency with which telepathic messages are received in a form which is partly symbolic. She found that her pupils in learning telepathy soon became expert in grasping the meaning behind the symbols which came to them repeatedly. Mrs. Garrett describes her sensations when sending telepathic messages and writes that she has the feeling that her five senses are tied to something like a white beam which she sends here and there with an effort of will to contact those to whom a message is to be sent. When this white beam, she does not speak of it as a beam of light, meets an obstacle, it bends around it. The obstacle is felt but not seen as a rule. This white beam corresponds to the kahuna idea of a finger of shadowy body substance which is projected by the low self, feeling or following with great speed along the threads of shadowy substance which already have been fastened and established as contact or connecting mechanisms between individuals who have once met. Mrs. Garrett also describes the sensation of experienced frequently by those who practice telepathy, the sensation of faint electric tingling or warmth, often accompanied by a tactile response of goose flesh when a working contact has been made. In her own case, these sensations often warn her that a message is being projected to her by someone and that her attention is needed to receive it. Deep breathing is a common preliminary to telepathic practice or other forms of psychometrizing, all these related forms depending on the movement of thought forms along a thread of connecting shadowy body stuff. Deep breathing seems to help in getting the low self to relax and set to work. Impressions come frequently as from below the solar plexus, which has been considered the main seat of the low self when sending out or receiving messages or sensory impressions. A slightly different phase of telepathy is one in which distant scenes appear before the inner eye. This is often called clairvoyance, and it occasionally includes glimpses of events that will transpire in the future. According to the kahunas, any glimpse or knowledge of the future which comes in connection with psychic practices must be given by the high self. Mrs. Garrett writes very clearly of her sense of greater alertness and of her quickening perceptions when she makes contact with what she has called the superconscious. And from her statements, it is to be deduced that she contacts that same high self described in the Huna philosophy. A similar increase in lucidity and a similar sharpening of the senses and perceptions has been mentioned by other psychics, particularly when they were fully or partially out of the physical body, either in a state known as astral projection or when they had left the body while a controlling spirit used during trance states. After these explanations and comments, a better understanding of the case materials given in the next chapter will be possible. It must always be kept in mind that this is a very important part of magic, and that it needs understanding in careful detail to become practical in our hands, as it was in the hands of the kahunas. The Secret Science Behind Miracles by Max Freedom Long. The easy way to dream into the future. Case 16. Learning to dream into the future. Preliminary notes. J.W. Dunn, in his popular book An Experiment with Time, describes a simple and very easy method which he learned to use to dream into the future. The method is based on the fact that most of us dream of future events but do not remember the dreams upon awakening. A pencil and paper is taken to bed with the experiment, and he impresses upon himself the determination to write down his dreams whenever he awakens during the night and can recall what he was dreaming. Most people dream from the moment they fall asleep until they awake, even if they seldom remember a dream and so conclude that they seldom dream. Mr. Dunn kept a record of dreams which he had written down in the night, and found in some instances that he had dreamed of certain events in his life 15 years before they occurred. One of these events was important enough to have been crystallized long in advance. It was a dream of flying over a pasture in one of the crude planes of the early experimental years of flight. He also tabulated the result obtained by his friends and concluded that almost anyone can use the method successfully. In passing, it may be noted that he met the problem of the impossibility of seeing what had not yet happened, but by the simple expedient of deciding that the past, present, and future of time are all right here with us, but that we cannot see beyond the instant of the present when events become momentarily actualized. Like Ouspensky in his Tertium Organum, Mr. Dunn falls back on the idea of a space-time complex, leaps from that to a fourth dimension, and ends with little more than a play on words. The case. I read An Experiment with Time on a Sunday afternoon in Honolulu in 1926. The night I took pencil and paper to bed with me, determined to write down all my dreams in order that I might watch for those relating not to the past or present, but to the future. It was a restless night, and I arose in the morning with several dreams and one drawing of a crude kind on my pad of paper. My notes ran like this. I omit all dreams which did not come true. Strange, big, fattish man came to me and asked if I would help him on an invention, something of an optical nature. Was at my desk, had before me a piece of smallish machine, about 2 feet 6 inches by 4 inches in size, black electrical cord and white one running from the rear end of the thing. It looked like a black enameled lid. In the side of this lid, or cap, was a square hole about 4 inches by 4 inches. On the top of the lid was an hourglass-shaped set screw of blued steel. I made the rough drawing here of the lid. I was in a latticed low kitchen. Fat man there, stranger also there, tall, slim, light, and about 40. Small Hawaiian woman there. I took sensitive paper from a box and placed it in a small opening in the machine. The thin man touched a switch and a light flashed. I took out the paper and developed it in one of 3 strange little white photo trays. The developed image was a scale and a pointer which indicated a large number. I looked at the men. We laughed. I said, "Well, it works." That was on Sunday night. On the following Thursday afternoon, the dreams began to come true. The fat man I had seen in my dreams came into my camera store. He wanted help in splitting a ray of light to get an image of a weight scale on a ground glass screen and a strip of recording photo paper at the same time. The top of the mechanism of the scale was described to me. It checked with the lid I had seen in my dream. I agreed to help. The next part of my dream was wrong. The lid was never brought to me, and I never had it before me on my desk. I did not see it until after the mechanism I worked out, and which was built in a local machine shop, was completed. I saw it later, however, in the lattice kitchen of my dream. The tall, light man of my dream was the mechanic on the job, and it was his kitchen. The small Hawaiian woman was also there. She was his wife. The machine was used for weighing sugar syrup in sugar refineries. When the problem had been solved and the mechanic had made changes in the machine at my direction, I went for the last time to the lattice kitchen to test the machine with sensitized paper. As it happened, I had acquired the unfamiliar little white photo trays in a trade only the day before. They were of Japanese manufacture and of a type and material I had never seen. The results of the test were exactly as I dreamed them, except that we all exclaimed laughingly, "Well, it works," for I had told of my dreams by then and had exhibited the notes. I also dreamed of several other future events during this period of experimentation, but no dream sequence was ever again so filled with people, mechanisms, and places so strange to me as to be entirely beyond the change of imagining them beforehand. Comment. It will be noted that dreams of the future are not given primarily as warnings of accidents, deaths, or other troubles. The ordinary life with its normal daily events are seen for the most part. It is for this reason that the average person finds a little more than a temporary interest in using the done method, and soon finds that a night of unbroken sleep is preferable to seeing into the future in a hit-and-miss fashion. While my own interest was keen for a time, I, like most others, soon tired of the experiment. I then made the mistake of grumbling to myself when sleepily struggling to write down a dream. The light, when turned on so that I could see to write, hurt my eyes, and soon my low self got the idea that the whole matter was undesirable. It formed a complex opinion of the matter, and thereafter seemed to refuse to pass on to me any picture of a future event which it obtained. In the light of my experience, I strongly advise the beginner to provide himself with a weak night light, which will not hurt the eyes when turned on. Above all, tell your sleep self what a pleasure it is to awaken and write down dreams. Of course, if one has a recording instrument and can press the button and speak the description of the dream into the mouthpiece, that is the ideal equipment. Also, if my experience is a criterion, one will learn inside a month to know by some inward sense whether a dream belongs to the future and is worth recording, or whether it is a common dream with little or no significance. The field of the sleep state offers great possibilities for experimentation in other ways. There seems to be no better time for suggestion to enter the low self than during normal sleep. And this form of suggestion does not need the hypnotic force which we associate with hypnotic suggestion. The spoken word is enough. It may be spoken by a machine on which a carefully prepared record is placed. The record may be started during the night by a clock, made to repeat or play through and stop, and under the pillow speaker may be used. In any event, the words are to be played with low volume. In a few nights they will cease to awaken one. The low self, which remains sensitive to sound during sleep, seems to hear the worded suggestion and make thought forms automatically of those worded suggestion. These thought forms lodge in the shadowy body of the low self and remain there by the usual rationalizing process to which they would be subjected during wakening moments. Rationalizing by the middle self is a process of tying to the words and thoughts of a suggestion a contradictory string of thought forms saying that the suggestion is not workable. For this reason, one using the recorded suggestion during sleep will do well to assure himself that the things which he elects to have read as suggestions by the machine during his sleep are acceptable, and that the low self will respond and make them workable. This attitude of the middle self, which is one of confident expectancy, leaves the low self freely open to accept the suggestions made at night and to react to them more and more fully as the nightly repetition goes on. Most of us are smothered by our inhibitions and habits. From childhood, our failures build in us complex beliefs in our inability. We suffer from fear complexes. We're afraid of people, or even of God. The list is long. Much illness results from fixations. For this reason, the recorded suggestion given through sleep needs careful consideration, and when it comes to learning to cause the low self to deliver our telepathic prayers for instant healing to the high self, the records may play a splendid part in the high magic. While mention above should be made of the fact that hypnotized subjects have often been reported as telling of events before they occurred, it is only as by accident that such prevision comes. It cannot be had upon command of the hypnotic operator, which again offers proof that the subconscious, which responds to suggestion, does not have the ability to see the future, but must have the future shown it by a being of superior mental powers. The kahuna say by the Aumakua, or high self. For the student wishing to examine the record of premonitory abilities infrequently displayed by hypnotized subjects, the book by Reichert, 30 Years of Psychic Research, is available in most good libraries. Case 17. Foreknowledge in Ordinary Dreaming. Preliminary notes. Dreams which foretell the future are of several kinds. One of the most common is that in which the dreamer dreams of a symbol, and when awake, translates the symbol and predicts the general nature of the event. For instance, a gentleman of my acquaintance would sometimes dream of seeing a fine red bull. This was for him the symbol of a lucky happening to come, and it was seldom that a fortuitous event did not follow soon after such a dream. Another kind of dream mixes symbols with events from both past and future. Often the mixing distorts the events appearing in the dream. I once dreamed of seeing a store window filled with leaping monkeys who flourished fountain pens and wrote very long marks with them on moving curls of paper. Later in the same week, I recognized the store window of my dreams when I saw a toy monkey dancing on a revolving table. In the opposite window, a small machine was on display in which a paper cylinder revolved under the point of a fountain pen, making miles of line to show the large ink capacity. The dream which touches only the future event and shows it clearly and unmixed may also move from one point in time ahead to others. This type of dream is the most deserving of study and cultivation. My father, at a certain time in my boyhood, had many such dreams. He would recount them at the breakfast table and ask us to remember them and help him check later to see how accurate they were. He recognized them by an inner sensing as dreams belonging to the future. The case. My father dreamed of a valley in which sheep moved through the Wyoming sage. This time progressed, and in the same valley he saw a railroad being built. Another leap forward, and a town occupied the valley on one side of the railroad. On the opposite side, a coal mine was opened and working. Behind the town, an oil derrick stood. The final step ahead in time showed the same valley, but with everything gone except the rail line and the foundations of the vanished buildings. This dream of a single night covered a period of about 10 years. Father later recognized the valley and saw the new rail line pass through it. Then a town, Spring Valley, Wyoming, rise. The coal mine opened. The oil well drilled near the town and later plugged. Soon the mine proved too dangerous to work because of gas, and the Union Pacific, which owned everything, removed all structures, leaving the valley as last seen in the dream. I personally saw the valley in these various stages. Comment. At the time my father had this dream, the coal vein at Spring Valley had not been discovered. It was only after the rail line had been laid that the discovery was made and the mine opened. It may be said with authority that in this dream there was no reading of the mind of another person. It was a straight, clear and detailed viewing of events of which no living man could have had knowledge at the time. We are forced to conclude, 1. That some intelligent being or form of consciousness had been able to foresee the future of the valley and in doing so, it demonstrated a form of mental power much superior to that of the conscious or subconscious selves. This checks with the high self of the Huna system. Or two, we have the alternative of concluding that the subconscious has the ability to see into the future, but this is a fallacy proven by its inability to see the future under hypnotic command. Case 18. Seeing the future through crystal gazing. Preliminary notes. Crystal gazing produces a condition of relaxation in which the low self is able to enter a state of similar to that of sleep, with the difference that the middle self is able to stand by and observe the dreamlike images which appear in the crystal. The case. A. I have already mentioned the lady who lived at Lovelock, Nevada, and who learned the art of scrying, as it was called in ancient times. Not only was she able to find my friends at a distance and see what they were doing, she was able to make a spoken request for vision of future events, and frequently to get them in her crystal. 2 sittings were devoted to trying to look into the future to see what lay ahead for me. At that time, I was traveling from town to town making photographs, and I was about to go to places which I had not visited before. In fact, I had not decided what those places were to be. During these sittings, she saw 2 detailed and complete parts of my future, each covering a period of about 1 week. Looking into her crystal, she saw a picture begin to take form in color and motion. She described it to me as it moved and changed from scene to scene. First there was a small town, laid out in neat streets on either side of a railroad line. There was a station, and she saw me getting off a train with bags and cameras. The next picture changed. She saw me entering a modern brick hotel. Next, she saw me standing on a cottage porch talking to a red-haired young woman dressed in white and holding on her arm a baby with red hair. A following scene showed Indians encamped not far from the hotel and holding some kind of a meeting. It was taking pictures of the camp. This foreseeing proved to be correct in every detail in less than a month. I took a train to Mesa, Nevada, and upon arriving, recognized the town and hotel as one which had been described. During my stay, I met the woman dressed in white who had red hair and made photographs of her red-headed baby. 2 days after my arrival, Indians began to pour into the town of the annual conclave of the tribes of the Carson Sink region. They camped near the hotel, and I made my pictures of the camp and of the Indians. B. A second town, which I visited after leaving Mason, was Yarrington, Nevada. It was exactly as it had been seen in the crystal. I left the railroad in a stage and traveled a couple of miles to find the town just as described. One built along an old main road with almost no side streets. I watched for a rooming house bearing a sign, Globe Rooming House, with a picture of a globe painted underneath, and it soon came into sight. I knew that this was the place where I was to stay, and after getting down and ringing the bell, I watched hopefully to see whether or not the woman with dark hair and slightly crossed eyes would appear. She did, and as it turned out, she became my good friend, helping me to get business and lending me some such appreciated books on occultism. Comment. The advantage of crystal gazing over ordinary dreaming is apparent. In the former, one decides what is desired in the way of forevision, and in the latter, one has to take what can be intercepted in haphazard manner for dreams. An interesting angle is to be seen in the mechanism through which the future is seen. While in other sittings no vision of the future appeared to answer to a request, there were other times when prevision came without request. The requests were spoken aloud without knowing to whom they were to be addressed, and it is surprising that there were any answers at all. Seeing into the future is contrary to present scientific beliefs, as are firewalking and instant healing. Science has no explanation to offer and is a stalemate on these points, but the kahunas show the way ahead for those of open mind who are ready to investigate the evidence which has been accumulated. Case 19. premonitory information through spirit of the dead. Preliminary notes. According to the kahunas, all contact with the spirits of the dead, as with the higher self, is made by the low self. This applies in particular to the spirits in their invisible state, in which they must be seen or sensed by what we may call psychic ability, which is nothing more nor less than the ability to relax and let the low self see and report anything from ordinary dreams to seeings of the past, the present, and the future. It is reasonable to believe that when we die and become spirits, we have only the mental powers we had during life. The act of dying does not make the lower selves into a superconscious with the ability to look into the future. However, we have the same ability to contact the higher self and ask for vision of the future. And if we're able to make our presence known to the low self of a living person, we may be able to pass on, through it, information which have obtained on the other side. There is an alternate method by which one relaxes and lets the spirit of a dead person enter the body and speak through its lips. This is not an uncommon method. It is used by mediums and is highly approved by spiritualism. It is studied by psychical research and condemned by the church and by reactionary science. In the state of trance, when spirits are speaking through the medium, they are, as if by accident, sometimes able to foretell the future correctly. They cannot do it so at will, which tends to prove that the high self must give such information to the spirits of the dead as well as to the low selves of the living. The records of psychical research are replete with instances in which spirits have correctly foretold the future, and with instances in which they have tried to do so and failed dismally. The failure has been so frequent that it has caused spiritualism to be looked upon with question. At spiritualistic seances, as well as with the Ouija board and similar mechanisms, the low self of a dead person, when it has been cut off from its middle by some accident of dying, loves to communicate with the living. Being unable to use good reasoning powers, inductive, it tries to answer any question put to it, usually guessing or reading the mind what the sitters expect to hear by way of an answer. In this fashion, no end of seeming lies are told by the spirits in spiritualism given a black eye. When we learn to tell the difference between these isolated low self visitors and the regulation normal spirit having both a low and middle self, we will not be deceived so often. The case. A. At breakfast, when I was a lad, my mother told the family that she had awakened in the night and had seen her sister, May, who lived in San Francisco. We live in Wyoming. She had appeared misty and had said that she had died and that it was her wish that her 2 children be taken and reared by my mother. The next day, a telegram came telling of the sudden death of May. The 2 children were, as requested by the ghostly mother, taken into our family to be reared. B. A spirit speaking through the well-known Australian medium, Mrs. Foster Turner, at a seance in February in 1914 with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, gave the following premonitory information, which later turned out to be correct. Quote, "Now, though at present there is not a whisper of a great European war at hand, yet I want to warn you that before this year, 1914, has run its course, Europe will be deluged in blood. Great Britain, our beloved nation, will be drawn into the most awful war the world has ever known. Germany will be the great antagonist and will draw other nations in her train. Austria will totter to its ruin. Kings and kingdoms will fall. Millions of precious lives will be slaughtered. But Britain will finally triumph and emerge victorious." End quote. This sitting was in a hall, and the prediction was heard by nearly 1,000 people composing the audience. Comment. Knowing that the future can be foreseen, It takes no great stretch of the imagination to grasp the kahuna idea of a high self with superior mental powers which enable it to see ahead. But, and this is far more difficult, we cannot so easily imagine this ability at work when it passes from a general prediction, such as we might make by guessing at the outcome of present conditions, to the detailed prediction. If the high self used the type of reason that we middle selves use, it could only guess, and as it gives small details, there is either a magnificently superior form of reasoning or super reasoning brought into play, or, as the kahunas believed, the future event or condition is actually a real thing formed, though it is of invisible shadowy body, aka or mea, substance similar to that of which thought forms are composed. If the high selves, working in a union or oneness quite beyond our comprehension, take the deeds and thoughts and desires of the world of middle and low self-humanity, and averaging all these, produce the pattern of the future, then that pattern is visible in the high self plane of consciousness, and all its details are crystallized and set in so far as the main pattern is determined. These conditions bring home to us the fact that the high self has powers of mentation so greatly superior to ours that we can hardly conceive of them, to say nothing of the impossibility of understanding how they work. We can know so little, we must speculate so much. However, all we really need to know to be able to make practical use of our semi-knowledge is the part we must play to gain the aid of the high self to shape our future toward health, success, and more kindly living in service. The kahunas believe that the great events of the future were set and could be foreseen far ahead. World or national events might be seen hundreds or even thousands of years ahead. The future of the individual, because of the shortness of human lifetime, could be seen only months or years ahead. The kahunas demonstrated constantly their ability to foresee the future of the individual and gain the aid of the high self to change it for the better. From this we can conclude that the future of the world and nations might also be foreseen and changed by concerted effort. We were sufficiently enlightened. Today, when we consider the possible use of the atom bomb as a weapon, we might, if agreed, did not rule the world, still be able to take such concerted action as to change what appears, even to our blind eyes, to be inevitable disaster. Unfortunately, the majority of mankind is moved by greed and the animal instincts of the low self with its complex and unreasoning hates and fears, rather than by the unemotional logic of the middle self. Few indeed listen to the promptings of the high self where the rule of love and service holds way. Our conscious mind selves may be said to rule that world, but they are dominated by the low selves, which are still animals, willful, savage, and unthinking. As middle selves, we have been given free will. But until our cumulative world experience is sufficient to teach us the lessons we must learn, we will use the gift of free will very badly, both as individuals and as nations. The kahunas taught that there was an ideal condition to which the individual might aspire. It was a condition in which the aid and guidance of the high self was requested, received, and then acted upon. The one rule of this life that must be obeyed was that we should do nothing to hurt another. For those more advanced, the rule included loving service. Love can unite men and enable them to do great works for good of all. Hate and fear can unite men only for war and destruction. When the kahunas were at their best in Polynesia, they taught the people to live without hurting others. Those who willfully hurt others were considered worthy of death and were frequently punished with the death prayer. It was the means of developing in Polynesia. They taught the people to live without hurting others, Those who willfully hurt others were considered worthy of death and were frequently punished with the death prayer. It was the means of developing in Polynesia the most friendly and considerate people in the entire world. All the early explorers marveled at this and mentioned it in their writings without exception. It was the greatest approach to a golden age during the span of time covered by recorded history. End of chapter. Let's head on over to the next video, but before you do, please do hit the like button. Let me know you were here. Leave me a comment. Share this with your friends. Subscribe to the channel. In the next video, in this book titled The Secret Science Behind the Miracles, the next chapter is going to have to do with healing, instant healing. And I have a tale or two to share with you of my personal experience. So let's head over to the next video and I'll tell you more about that.